Welcome back. Happy New Year to all of you. Welcome back to Sunrise Christian Fellowship, where joy does come into the morning. We thank you so much for joining us for our Bible study. This is the first one of the year. We're excited to be back. We're excited to see you all. We're excited for what God has for us going on through this year. This entire year, we're going to be teaching on just Jesus. We're going to go through everything dealing with Jesus. We'll start in Matthew, work our way all the way through the Gospels, because we want you to say at the end of this year that you truly know Jesus, that you have a better knowledge of Jesus, a better understanding of Jesus. But we dare not leave you on a cliffhanger like some of our other shows that we watch sometimes, and we don't even know what happened. So we got to finish up Romans. So we're going to try to go as fast as we can in the next 2-3 weeks to breeze through the rest of Romans. But we are not just here reading, we are studying this word. So sometimes we got to take our time to get through it. But after that, we'll be going into the Gospels, and we'll be spending the rest of the year on just Jesus. So we're so glad to have you. I'm Pastor Keith. Thank you for joining us. We're here every single Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. here at Sunrise Christian Fellowship. You're more than welcome to come on out and join us in person. We're at 4344 West Cheyenne. We would love to have you in here, join in the conversation. A lot of times when we cut the camera off, we're here for quite a while, still talking about what we did in Bible study. So this week, though, we're going to go ahead and jump into Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13, where Paul is giving us some advisement, and he's talking to us about how we are as believers to deal with those in positions of authority, how we're supposed to deal with those that are governing over us. What does that look like for the Christian believer? What does that look like? We already know he's been telling us all throughout the Bible, all throughout this chapter, about every single spot where we're supposed to go. And so understand that Paul, in this particular part where he is in this chapter, this is very, very difficult. And I know we said that before about some other things, but this is really, really hard, what he's talking about here, because he is talking about two Romans and two also Jews as well, about how they are supposed to conduct themselves, even though right now they are under Roman rule. Right, they're under some people that are actually over them, that they did view as oppressive, that they did not get along with. The Romans did not like the Jews and look down on them, and the Jews felt the same way about the Romans. And yet he has to give us a whole chapter about how do you deal with those that are in authority over you. What does submission look like for the believer? And understand, this was not something that Paul did not have a hard time with himself, right? And so we're going to get into it, and we're going to talk about it. I want you to know that this is even difficult for me to teach on, because I am a little bit rebellious in how my ideologies are, but the Bible is what it is. And so we're going to teach you what it says, because it is correct. So let's start with Romans chapter 13. We're going to start with verse number 1. And I'm going to be reading it for you out of the NIV. And so in the NIV, it says, "Let everyone be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." So again, this verse in this chapter is really important, because it's talking about how we are supposed to be with those that are in authority. You got to remember that Paul, at the time before he ran into Jesus and had his divine meeting with him, Paul was a Pharisee. And so he had a different way of how he looked at these particular things, and how he looked at those that were over him in the Romans and whatnot. They hated the Romans, and they hated being ruled by them. But here he is with a whole new renewed way and a new renewed teaching that he is saying to them, right? This is not something that's coming from Saul. This is Paul. To me, this is where Paul really becomes Paul, because Saul would not have been saying any of this stuff right here. He'd have been yelling from the mountaintops that whoever was saying this was a sellout and all of that stuff or whatever. But he is renewed. The Holy Spirit has renewed him, and now he's saying what God has given him to say. And that happens to us so many times. Have you ever had that, where you caught yourself saying something that you would not be saying, but God gave it to you to say to somebody else, and you like, oh my goodness, has to be God. It's evident sometimes that this is God by some of the stuff that the Holy Spirit can allow to come out of your mouth. But he's preaching this stuff with a renewed spirit of what God has given him. And he's saying that God establishes order and authorities, and we must trust in what he has allowed, right? The only time that they disobeyed the Romans, right, was to follow what God's moral standards. So the way that the hierarchy works is that you do listen to God first, but you do follow what God has allowed to be established as the law. It does not mean that you can just go rogue and do your own thing, right? God establishes order and authorities, and we must trust in what he has set up, right? And so you must be prepared, though, in this, and we'll get into this in the next verse about what happens if you decide to disobey the authorities, right? But he's talking in this when he's saying this stuff because God knows that without order and without authority, we would be chaotic, we would be wild, we would be all over the place, we would be doing all kinds of stuff, without rules and without regulation. There is absolute chaos and disorder. And so a lot of this that he's saying is because God has allowed us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. Y'all need some rules. Y'all need rules. Otherwise, y'all are going to be out here doing all kinds of stuff, being completely buck wild, and then I'm gonna have to come down there and get you spanking. So that's where he started here. So the authorities had that when he says God has established these things, it's really a generality that God has established order, and he's put things in order for us, even laws and authorities and governing rule, right? So verse number 2, it says, consequently, whoever rebels against the authorities is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. So understand that if you decide, even as a believer, that you're going to go rogue and you just don't feel that this is right in your spirit and you're going to do, something that is illegal or against the rules, God is telling you in his word, be prepared for the consequences. When you think about things like the civil rights movement, right? They were breaking laws that were established in that particular time that they felt and believed that God was telling them was incorrect. But there was consequences that came to that. They were beat, they were drugged, they were water hosed. Some of them, even lost their lives in doing this. Why? Because it's still biblical that if you go against what has been already instituted as an authority, be prepared that there will be some judgment, that there could be consequences coming down this way, even if God has sent you to do it. Even if God is trying to raise the consciousness of the people that are around you, he's still letting you know, I did send you on this, but understand there may be consequences to breaking laws. And so what God is simply saying, what Paul is saying here in this particular verse is obey the law. Just obey the law. Do what they tell you to do. Follow the law. Right? Don't try to be one of those people that's completely rogue and doing everything, So like we said, the way it goes is that you obey God first, but you must also obey the law. God has allowed these laws to go into what they are supposed to be. So don't be out here breaking laws for your own self-serving and personal reasons. God is not in that, right? God is not in you just out here roguely breaking laws. That's not what he's in. He did not institute. He did not tell you that. If you are a person that is consistently breaking laws, I'm going to really question if you hear from God at all, because God may have sent you a different way on one thing, but everything, a bunch of things, a ton of you just one of the people that you just don't obey no laws. Yeah, I don't know how much you really are hearing from God about that. And so he's pretty much saying in that second verse right there, obey the law. Just do what it tells you to do. Now, in verse 3, here we go. It says, for rulers hold no terror for those who do right. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. I stumbled so many times through this. I had to read it again and again and again and again. And sometimes the word of God is like that. You have to read it again until it just rests on you. Some things is just against your nature, but that's okay. You just have to allow it to do its work in you. And so Christians, what it's saying here in verse number 3 is that Christians should not fear the law or authorities because you shouldn't be the one that's doing anything wrong. You shouldn't be afraid of the police because you wasn't speeding. You shouldn't be scared when the cop walks into, the grocery store because you wasn't the one that was stealing.
Yeah, but
oh, here we go. What's the but?
Well, okay, my but.
Better yet, you're going right into my question, so put it in the chat.
Okay.
Why are you afraid as a believer of the law? Why are you afraid of police officers if you're a believer? Why are you afraid of cops and courts and judges in the law of the land if you are a believer? What are you afraid of? Why?
What's your exact? Is it of the law or of police?
Well, the law, that's what I mean. So he's talking about, when he says authorities, he's more so talking about lower level authorities. We're talking more so about your police officers, people that keep, civility and keep the rules that we have in day-to-day life is more so.
Okay.
Why are we afraid of? If you're a believer, why are you afraid?
So this is for me.
Uh-huh.
We had a long stint of Black people getting killed by the police. And so for me, it lessened my trust in what your intent is when you're stopping me.
Mm-hmm.
And are you gonna just stop me? Like if I'm going too fast, whatever, am I just getting the ticket?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you gonna do something wrong and I'm gonna get out of the car and not get back in the car ever again? So it's like it was a fear of that, even if I wasn't doing anything wrong. So like, for example, I was driving on the side of the road. I didn't do anything wrong. I got pulled over. I wasn't afraid because of my behavior. It was a dark road. There was no lights, and I didn't see any other cars around.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, if you did do something to me, nobody would know. And that fear was heightened because it had been so many Black people back to back to back to back that things happened and nobody got reprimanded. It just got brushed under the rug. Nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's my caveat. It wasn't because I did anything wrong.
Right.
And so I kept my hands up, and the officer was like, "Can I give me your registration?" I said, "You are more than welcome to get it." And then I was asking him for permission for every single thing.
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Can I go on my purse? Can I do this?" You could tell he was getting irritated. And he's like, "I told you could." I said, "No. I need you to tell me step by step,
mm-hmm.
so you don't think that I'm reaching for anything." But I was petrified.
Now, I'm going to ask my question again, and I'm going to highlight a word, because your answer you just gave me is why Amber was afraid.
Right.
I said, why, as a believer, why, if you're a believer in that same situation you just described, why are you afraid?
I'm not. As a believer, I'm not afraid of the police.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that kind of fear. Of course, I'm an older lady, but this is speaking in generalities, because the cop that pulls you over to hurt you is also one of these people that is bucking authority.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, he's a criminal,
right?
In a sense,
right?
But in general, this Bible, because the disciples got arrested for preaching.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus did absolutely no wrong, but he got crucified.
Yep.
And so it's not talking about the caveat.
Okay.
It's talking about in our general,
mm-hmm.
in our general behavior, the people who are getting, for the most part, arrested, even if they get beat up a little bit and the cops going overboard, a lot of the time, maybe not all the time, but a lot of times they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have that kind of fear of the police, especially as a believer, because you can send me to heaven, but I don't have that kind of fear.
What? Anybody else? Why do you get scared or nervous when you have encounters with law enforcement?
I think that, matching to what Pastor has said, like with the disciples, like they were doing right, like preaching the gospel, doing everything, and yet they all had to suffer the consequences So I think it's just in that form, like, oh man, like I'm doing something right. I know, like, of course, I'm gonna go to paradise, but it's like I don't want to suffer the consequences for doing it right.
Right.
It's not a fear. It's just like a food for thought. Like, man, this could possibly happen.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat put maybe the individual in authority, maybe they aren't Christ-like. So I guess that goes back to the first part of what we said. Because I don't always feel that way, but when that situation was happening, I was kind of like, I don't really want to be involved. But right now, I don't care.
And so he talks about that in the very next verse about what that means, what they actually are, whether if they know it or not. The police officers are God's servants. He mentions that in one. Even if they're not a believer, they don't know, that's what has been instituted, but that doesn't change the fact of what they are, what God has instituted them to be. But the reason why I highlighted it and asked that question as a believer is because of the things that we stand on and the things that we rest on. So first and foremost, the spirit of fear, right? God is not giving that to you.
Right.
So in this instance, unless you have done something that you ain't supposed to be doing, right? Then there's that. And we understand we live in this world where, it has been told to us, it's been shown to us, it's been fed to us that, certain people are more sought after by law enforcement at times, right? And so, but you're coming from a higher perspective of the sense that I'm not just coming from this as a black man or as a black woman. I'm coming from this from the sense of as a believer. And so even in that, you can ask yourself, what does that play in the background of even that evil law enforcement, right? An evil officer, like you were saying. What if this person wants to do something foul to me because they are abusive to their power and what they have, right? In that, we're still dealing with the same evil that we always have to fight. The same enemy, the same evil that we always have to fight everywhere else in all other instances. You understanding that is the principality that is operating in that officer that is being rogue and basically being a criminal to you, right? It's still the same enemy that you're going. So what would you have done if you came up against demonic oppression anywhere else? Why is that any different when we're saying it in the sense of law enforcement? If you think that that's what this is, you would come with the same tools and the same mindset and the same level of thinking and attack that you would normally have, right? And so instead of being so fearful, you're prayerful, right? Instead of being so fearful, you're cooperative. Because again, you understand who's really in control of all of this that we have going on. If they decide to throw you out the car on the hood and slam you up, jam you up, handcuff you, beat you, put you underneath the jail cell, God is doing something, right? Because you didn't do anything wrong. So your appeal should immediately go to what is God doing in this? Your mind should go all the way to something a little bit higher because they have no higher power than God, right? So you need to already in this situation, all right, Lord, what is happening here? Why am I getting pulled up? God, what are you doing? Right? But the spirit of fear against a person that's in law enforcement, that is something that, again, for the believer, you have to be able to debunk and bring yourself down from, right? And be able to remove yourself out of this particular part because you are a believer in God, right? So let's get to the part that the person said in the chat. So verse 4, it says, for the one in authority is God's servant. Is God's servant for your good. I'm sorry. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. God tells you right then and there, if you out here messing up, be afraid because you out here messing up, right? If you, he says, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So without them even knowing it or not, police work is God's work. How crazy is that, right? Next time you see a cop, I want you to tell them, thank you for your service. And they're going to think that you're talking about, police work or whatever. No. You out here doing God's work without you even knowing that that's what you're out here doing is God's work. Because if we did not have police officers, evil would be allowed to run rampant all over the place, would be allowed to do whatever it wants to do. You think child trafficking is bad? You think sex trafficking is bad? You think break-ins with people's cars and theft and anything else, murder, rape, pillaging, whatever you want to call it. You think it's bad now? Imagine, and that's where a lot of police officers do get frustrated. It's because they know the bulk of them are out here doing good. They're doing God's work without knowing that they're calling it God's work, right? So they're out here doing good and they're keeping the bad men away from you, and yet they are not being looked at in that light. You know how frustrating that has to be when you're doing good for other people and yet and still you're looked at as the enemy, right? Yeah. And understand where I'm coming from this. I'm feeling like Paul right now because of where I came from in my dealings with law enforcement, right? But the Bible is telling us that they are here to do good. They're God's servants for you to do well, right? If it's done by design, the way it was designed to, with righteousness, the law and authority is there for your good. If it does what it was designed to do with righteousness, it is there. Police, courts, judges, all of that stuff is there for your good. With righteousness. And so that's a good point. That's the key. If it's done with righteousness, right? So how do we do that? What is our role to play in that to make sure that it is done in righteousness? Have you thought about that? What can you do as a believer to make sure it's done in righteousness? Because my first thought would be prayer. Mm-hmm. Are you praying for the law enforcement? Are you praying for the cops? And not just the ones that you know personally. Are you praying for the judges? Are you praying for the lawmakers? Are you praying that they do this thing correctly and not corruptly, by design, with righteousness? Are you voting that way? Do you spend time to even know what your local judge's name is, let alone what they believe and where they stand? Or do you just go in there and vote on whoever's poster looked the best? I recognize Kirkpatrick's poster, so that's how I used to vote. I did. I'm not gonna lie. That's how I used to vote. It's like, did I see your poster? Oh, you look nice. I'll vote for that person. Or, I don't like their name, so I'm not gonna vote for that person. Because you didn't even take the time to look into what they believe. Are you praying for these people, for them to do their job in righteousness? Are you covering your leaders? Are you covering these people so that they do this by design? Because God is saying, if it's done correctly with righteousness, it is for your good. Yeah. If you ain't out here breaking laws, this is for you. This is good for you, right? And if you think about it, without authority, God knows we would act a fool. We said that already. Think about when you had a substitute teacher. When you have a substitute teacher, right? Even the good kids are strict. Even the kids that normally follow the rules are not following the rules. Well, not Crystal Daniels. Crystal Daniels followed all the rules, and she didn't break any. She didn't spend any time, But without this stuff, if you think about like college parties or high school parties, when somebody had their own house, when you're left without some type of authority over this, it is chaos, right? It's crazy. Overcrowded prisons and stuff, that places where they're understaffed. Well, now the prisoners are running the prison because there's no overarching authority. So knowingly or not knowingly, these people are God's servants to make this stuff act right. But what you were highlighting earlier, Amber, and what you guys have probably also been highlighting is that when God's servants don't act just, when they behave unjust, when you have a law enforcement agent that is doing something they're not supposed to be doing, that's what makes those of us that are just get uptight. And that goes universal, right? That goes for all of us. That's why they come down so hard on preachers when preachers get caught doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. Because it shakes your faith as a believer or as those that are following the rules when you see somebody who's supposed to be upholding the rules, breaking the rules, right? So there is responsibility for them as well, but it is our job to pray for them. It is our job for them to pray to make sure that they aren't corrupted by the enemy. You think the enemy isn't out here trying to make police officers be bad cops? You think that's what this is? Every time I read about that cops were involved in a sex ring, or judges were involved in child trafficking of some sort, or they're taking money under the table to keep people in prison longer, I'm looking at it. The enemy is at work on these people. Are we at work on them as well as the believers? Are we covering them as well? Right? So that's where another part that we have to play in all this. So go to verse 5. It says, therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but it's also a matter of conscience. The Christian, I got this from Pastor. The Christian should be an avid rule follower. If anybody is obeying the law, it should be the Christian. If anybody is following the rules, it should be the Christian. If anybody is in the left-hand lane going the speed limit, they're probably a believer. So those of you that speed, that claim that you're a believer, that's who you're honking at and yelling at and probably cussing at. You're cussing at a fellow believer because they are following the rules. Christians should be avid rule followers. We should be. We should be the people that put the basket back at the grocery store. We should be the ones that are following the rules, not running stop signs, not running red lights. That should be us, right? Even on our job, we should be the ones that are following the rules. 30 minutes means 30 minutes. Clocking in on time, not giving somebody your badge to clock in because you know you're going to be late. That should not be us. It shouldn't be you. It shouldn't. And here's why. If you are a believer and you're saying you're a rule breaker, they can see you breaking rules, obviously, right? You look like them. And so my question would be, and this is for everybody, could you right now effectively witness and or pray for your boss, your parents, or the last cop that you had an interaction with? You could. Or anyone, all of those people, your boss. Could you pray and witness to your boss, Mark, and be like, I'm a believer and I need to pray for you? And he'd be like, Mark, I know you be sleeping on your break. What you talking about? You've been stealing this whole time. What you gonna pray for me for? Everybody but the last copy. That's the point. You need to have such a witness and such character in how you handle yourself and all this, that you are able to talk to these people, reach these people, and pray for said people. Mikhail, you're shaking your head. What's going on? Which one you can? Oh, okay. I was about to say, which one you can witness to?
I have a witness
to all of them.
Can I read an online comment?
Yes, please.
It's Geneva put, we all need supervision and guidance, so we should pray for our protectors. I'm guilty of praying more for the ones I know. Never thought much about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I challenge all of you the next time you see a cop car to pray for that cop.
Yeah.
Rather than getting nervous and getting scared, when you see them drive by and you go, whew, because you were speeding, you was, and they didn't pull you over, you should pray, you should bless that cop. He didn't pull you over. God bless you, sir. God bless you. I hope you make it home safely. I hope your children get straight A's. I hope your wife loses as much weight as she wants to. Bless you, sir. You should bless that person. He is out here protecting lives. God bless you. Yes, Crystal.
So I was just thinking that we do have a bad habit of picking and choosing what we want to do. And then when you said that, I realized, so whenever I see someone pulled over, I always pray for the person
that's pulled over.
Yeah, never thought. Right. Almost have never thought, but that's not my first reaction.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Bad people.
Yes. And again, if the system is working the way it's designed to, that's the criminal. That's probably the person that is doing wrong. That cop is out here protecting you. That person was on their way to go rob you, and you worried and praying for them. Not the cop. What are we doing? We're not.
Anytime I have attitude,
I've never thought about that either. When I see an accident in the EMT, I never pray for the EMT. I pray for whoever is in medical need, but I don't think about the EMT. They're getting ready to drive on the other side of the street with the lights blaring, trying to get this person to the hospital. They can get injured just as much as anybody else can out here, right? This person could be mentally unwell and then jumped up and stabbed them with something. Like, we don't know, and we're not praying for them as well. Yes.
I was going to say that being in the run-ons, it changed my perspective of that. Because before we roll up on the call, we have to call police so we can be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I was like, dang, I need to start being selfish and stop thinking so pessimistically, because a lot of people, like it says, we could be their biggest blessing or the worst nightmare depending on the situation.
Yeah.
So
Exactly that. You are calling God's servant. That's what you're calling. You're getting ready to go into a situation, and who do you call? You call God's servant to come and make sure that you are protected. And that if you looked at the authorities in that regard, I think your prayer would go up higher for them. You would probably pay more attention to what they're doing in government to make sure that you're covering these people in prayer, to make sure that you're covering if they are doing wrong. Prayer works, right? This person seems corrupt. That don't mean that they're above getting some prayer that may actually change what they are doing. Reverend BJ does a great job of this. She prays for whoever the president is, whoever it is, it does not matter. She prays avidly for that person because she understands that prayer can change that, right? So the Christian should be following the rules. You should feel wrong for doing shady stuff, running red lights, getting the hookup, doing things that aren't the rules, because you know ain't nobody gonna check you and ain't nobody gonna say nothing to you, or because you in a rush, now you want to break rules because you in a rush, right? That is not what the Christian should be doing or what the believer should be doing, right? We should be the ones that are obeying the rules. So I want y'all to think about that next time somebody in that left-hand lane that's driving the speed limit. You trying to break the rules and they being a believer out here, you should bless them. All right, so let's go. Let's get a couple more verses in. Let's go to verse number 6. Verse 6. So it says now, it says this is also why you pay your taxes. For the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. You never even thought about that. They giving their time to make sure this stuff runs properly. Verse 7, it says, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. And so in this, it's saying pay what you owe. Pay what you owe. Even if you think that the person that you owe got it. Young adults, you think your mama got it? Pay what you owe. It don't matter if she got it or not. The government got it, so you ain't got to pay your taxes. It don't matter if they got it or not. Pay what you owe. You owe it. And it doesn't matter if they move. That's where prayer comes. So what she said was, it doesn't matter if they're misusing it. If you don't agree with where they're utilizing your taxes, put that into where you vote. Put that into where you pray. If they are using too much of this because you don't believe in war, you need to start praying against war. They can't fund the war if there is no war, right? We have to continue to remember that the government or anybody else that's in authority is not over God. And you have the ear of God as a believer. You have his ear at all times. And so we need to be prayerful on these things that we're talking about so that they aren't mishandling the funds, that the funds are making it to where it's supposed to be. The people that are in need, those that are broke, had a natural disaster, that the government is actually utilizing those funds for infrastructure to rebuild stuff. And, governors. And again, Paul is more so talking about lower level, principalities and authorities that he's talking about here, but it does go up. It does go up. And this is where our minds and our prayers should be. But you got to pay what you owe, including pay the government what you owe. Don't be like some of these people out here looking for loopholes. Now, don't get me wrong. If it's a tax break because of what it is that you do, that's one thing. But if you're trying to find a loophole purposefully just so you don't pay any taxes and say, well, that's what the rich do. The rich don't pay no taxes. They found this loophole or that loophole or whatever. You are a believer. You are not supposed to be holding yourself up to the world, even the rich world. That is not your standard. Wealth is not where your standard is, right? And so it doesn't matter how you feel about this particular part. You have to do the right thing. This is the part that Pastor got to again that I wanted to incorporate with this because I got cut when you said this one. She said, be nice to the bill collectors because you're the one that owe them money. But they call me every day. I didn't have it yesterday. I told your person yesterday I ain't gonna have it. I don't know why you called me again today to check to see if that changed. I told you I get paid Friday. I'll have it for you Friday. I don't have it today, and you calling me on a Tuesday. But again, the way as a believer, they're doing their job. Why are you mean to that person and you owe them money? Why are you mean to them? That means the next time you give your friend their money back that you asked to borrow, it's not funky. Here's your funky $20. It wasn't funky when you asked for it. It wasn't funky when you asked for it. It was clean and needed. It was the most pristine thing you could have held on to when you needed. Now when they ask for it back, now it's funky. No, it's not. It's not. They have every right to ask for it. So be nice to these people, even if you don't have the money to pay them. That is not a cause for you to be rude and for you to be unkind to these people, right? And this again is what Paul is saying here. This is hard for him because the Romans are taxing. You got to understand how this works. The Romans are taxing Israel, and they're taxing the Jews, and the Romans are taxing those citizens that don't live in their country. So I'm taxing you just because I rule over you. I'm taking money away from your country that could be helping your country and helping your people, your house, and I don't even live there. Understand, taxes have caused wars, i.e. the Revolutionary War was because of taxes. The United States of America went to war with England over taxes. So Paul is not somebody that this is missed upon and he's saying this from a high place. They are upset. This is hard for them to do. It was frustrating and it was touching for them because the Romans are taxing these people and treating them poorly. And he's still saying, pay your taxes. To something, can you imagine if the people who came, like every time you pay taxes, right? When you go to the grocery store and you got to pay taxes, can you imagine if that person was rude to you every time, but you had to pay them the tax? Like you literally had to give them the money to pay for the taxes. And they're like, you got your taxes? You dirty dog. That's what they used to call them, was dogs and all this stuff, you know. And so for him to be writing this about people that do not like them and don't treat them correctly and still say, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what believers do. This is where we talked about in the last chapter, at the end of chapter 12. There has to be a difference between us and the world. They got to be able to see the difference in us. Pay your taxes, right?
And how he says it is if you owe. So some of that stuff was unfair, and tax collectors would take some more extra off the top.
Yeah.
But he's saying, but on the flip side, you don't avoid it. Y'all lost the war, and it's not like when Israel won the war, they didn't tax the people.
Right.
When Israel won, they had that was the way it was done. When Israel won the war, then they had the right to pull from the people that they conquered. So hey, y'all lost, and so this is the way it's done. And now this is what we get for winning the war. You all have taxes, but it was like be fair about it. But especially in the United States, because our taxes take care of so much stuff. Christians shouldn't be the one that's really trying not to pay them and claiming kids that you ain't doing have and get a lot of money under the table. And, you know, you do need to pay what you owe, but in our country right now, our kids go to school free. They don't in other countries. Other countries, kids have to pay to go to school. If you, this is the thing that kills me. If you jack up your own health, taxes will pay you for disability for the rest of your life for what you did
For what
to
you
you.
did to you. For what you did to you.
And so we do need to pay our share because we do take it back.
And in that, again, the animosity towards something that you signed for, right? Like, I think you said this too. You gave your word. You went to them people and said, I want this car, and signed your name and gave your word and said, I'm going to pay for this. You gave your word. The Christian's word should mean something. Your word should mean something. When you sign your name, it should mean something. Like, it really should mean something. They should be able to tell the difference between a believer and a non-believer, right? And that's reflective in your credit history. You pay your bills, right? And we understand you do hit hard times, but in that, even in that, keep an account of what you owe. Keep an account of what you owe. I have hit hard times, and in those hard times, I kept an account of who it was that I owed, and you know what I'm saying, to make sure that it was always, it weighed on me, and to pay what I owed. I did not want to be indebted to other people because I told them I was going to do this service or pay this thing or utilize what it is that I was supposed to utilize. So he's simply saying, pay what you owe. Okay, let's do these last three verses. We'll stop at number 10. And so verse number 8, he starts to go into why about love and the law and how those two things work together. So verse 8, he says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. So again, let no debt remain outstanding. That means pay all your bills. Let no debt. That means you lost, Mark. You told him that you was going to beat him in 2K. You didn't beat him in 2K. Let no debt, right? You pay all of your debts all the way across the board. You told that little boy, Tasia, that you was going to take him out for his birthday, and now you tired and don't want to. Take the boy out. Let no debt, no big, too small, right? Let them, none of those be left outstanding, right? It says, except for the one that says to love one another. Now, I stopped on that one because I was wondering why would Paul throw that in there, right? Why would he throw that in there about except for the debt of loving one another, right? And so the thing about that is the debt of loving one another is the main thing that Christ asked us to do, right? Jesus out of his own mouth didn't ask a whole lot for those that followed him. But one of the main things he said was to love each other. That was one of the main principles that he gave us, was to love each other, right? And so it's a debt. We are permanently indebted to God. There is no way for us to ever be able to repay him back for all that he does or all that he has done already, right? So our best lowly minimal attempt at repayment is just loving each other. Look at it in that regard. This is your repayment or your attempt to try to repay God, right? It's to love one another. My mom used to say that to us all the time. You know what would make me happy? If y'all just would get along. Talking about me and my siblings. If y'all just would get along, it just would make me so much more happy. And I'm like, pick something else. Like, can I wash dishes? Can I do something else rather than love this dude? You know what I'm saying? But God is that way about us. He loves each and every one of us so much, and he wants us to get along and to love on one another. And so that's why that's a debt that you always have, is because God wants us to always be loving on one another. Verse 9. So he says, the commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. All those commandments that he gave in those 10 commandments and a bunch of the other ones that were in the law were all centered around love and loving each other as yourself. And this is one of the things I wanted to get into really quickly that I thought was interesting. A lot of times as believers or just people in general, self-love has kind of gotten it's getting a resurgence now. But for a while, self-love was looked down upon, like loving on yourself and doing stuff for yourself, caring for yourself, all of those particular things. It was like we're supposed to be out here doing so much for others. You put yourself kind of like on the back burner, especially as you get older. You find so many other people that you put ahead of yourself, which is not in congruence with the word of God at all. Not at all. Because here's why. If you don't love yourself, and if you aren't giving yourself self-love, and if that is wrong, then it would be pointless to love your neighbor like yourself. If you don't love yourself or you don't take care of yourself, then what is God telling you to love your neighbor like that? What does that even mean? And so really quickly, how do you love on yourself? I just want to know. That was a question I just had in my mind. I wanted to ask her. How do you love on yourself? Doing things you like. Okay. Saying no.
Absolutely.
Okay. That was a little higher than I thought we were going to go with that.
Saying no to things, but saying no to yourself.
Saying no to things and saying no to yourself. Boundaries and expectations. Okay.
Recognizing your achievements.
Recognizing your achievements. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Forgiving yourself.
Forgiving yourself. That's good. Self-love. Anybody else?
Talking kind to yourself.
Talking kind to yourself. Okay, well, y'all went a little bit higher than I thought. Mine was I go eat. Self-love to me, like I worked. If I worked a really hard day and I worked hard for it, I'm going. Lunch is going to be good today. It's going to be really, really good. The point of it being is that even people with low self-esteem, you still do basic things that is considered still taking care of yourself and self-love. You still eat. With low self-esteem, you still gonna eat. You still gonna get dressed. You still gonna drink water and all those things. You're still gonna make sure you have a place to stay. Right? I said it. Drink water. Water. Right? You're gonna try your best not to hurt yourself and try your best not to cheat yourself, right? That's what God is saying in this. This is the same for your neighbor about loving them as you love yourself. Are you hungry? When you're hungry, what do? You eat. If you see your neighbor that is hungry, take care of self-love or loving your neighbor really just means actively working to see that their needs are met. That's what it means to take care and to love your neighbor. It's actively trying to make sure that your neighbor's needs are met. And again, neighbor can extend as far as you want to take the particular word. Those that live in your house, those that live outside of you, your family, your friends, and even a perfect stranger that you don't know, right? As God moves upon you, he's asking for you to love them like you love yourself. The basic things, eating and having something to wear, something to drink that isn't alcohol. Apparently I needed to say that, right? These things, right? Those are the same things. So when you think about self-love and self-care, I like what you said, Renata, paying attention to their achievements. Let people know you see their achievements, right? My neighbor, he has 2 daughters, and he always takes them out every day and puts them in this wagon, and then he attaches it to his bike, and they go out for a bike ride. And it's the cutest thing I've ever seen. Like, he just goes, it's always like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the daytime, and he takes his daughters out and they go on this bike ride. And so the other day I told him, I was like, man, I think that is really cute that what you do with your kids, and that, they're going to remember this for forever. I'm noticing something that you're doing with yourself, right? So notice their achievements. Do the same things that you would want done for yourself. That's loving on your neighbor, right? Then verse 10, it says, love does no harm to a neighbor, and therefore love is fulfilled, is the fulfillment of the law, right? And so Paul is making this understanding that even the law itself was all centered and rooted in us loving on one another, looking after one another, right? Doing well for one another, right? And when we do that and not harm one another, the law itself that is fulfilled in doing that, right? And so that's the how he kind of wraps this all up there in verse number 10. So we're going to stop right there. We're going to jump into verse number 11 next week. Paul is going to continue to keep talking to us about what we are supposed to be doing in reference to that. But again, I challenge you, all of you that are here and all of you that are online, pray for those that are in authority. When you see a cop, pray for them. EMT, pray for them, especially if it's the court. Pray for them. Firefighter, pray for them. Those that are in your boss, pray for them. If you live at home with your mama and your daddy and they getting on pray for them. You don't really care for the president, pray for them. Pray for those that are in positions of authority over you because they are designed to be God's servant. And so we have to pray that they remain in that position that they were originally designed for. So we'll see you guys back here next week at 6:30. We're here every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. except for the first Wednesday of every month. We're here at Sunrise Christian. You can join us online on all of our social media on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Our website is sunrisechristianlv.org, or you can come see us every single Saturday. We're here at 4344 at 6:30 on Saturday evenings. We would love to see you in person. Come on out, join with us, fellowship with us, and we would be more than happy to see you. But we'll see you guys here next week. Does anybody have any questions, anything that was online in the comments? All right, awesome. We'll see you guys next week here at Sunrise Christian Fellowship, where joy comes in the morning. You guys have a good week. We'll see you next time.